Let me know when you get it going and all. Oh, it is. Okay, it has started. Okay. Let me close it. Okay. Maybe wait a little while because people are still filing in and it'll make noise when they come in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sonia Scott, co-vice chair of the President's Advisory Committee on the Status of Women. And we work to improve the climate and opportunities for women at UCOP. We currently have 45 members representing the diversity of UCOP. PACSA sponsors the Women We Admire Speaker Series, which was started in 2009. I'd like to thank the Women We Admire subcommittee members, thank you, for organizing today's event. Elisa Shi, Erin Marnoka, Evelyn Chang, Freddie Harms, and Barbara Heilman. A couple of upcoming PACSA events are Women We Admire sessions. On September 8th, we've got Jocelyn Surla-Banaria. She's Assistant Director of the Academic Senate. And on December 11th, we have Carol Christ, the new Chancellor of the Berkeley campus. Our speaker today is Dr. Glenda Humiston, Vice President of UC Agriculture and Natural Resources. Vice President Humiston will leave time for questions at the end of her talk. Before she begins, let me tell you a bit about her background. Glenda Humiston was appointed Vice President of UC A&R on August 3rd in 2015. She was born in California and raised on a cattle ranch in Colorado, where she was a member of 4-H. She came to A&R with more than 25 years of experience working on public policy development and program implementation, supporting sustainability, which is one of President Napolitano's key initiatives. She served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia as executive director of a nonprofit organization advocating farmland preservation and value-added agriculture development, and several years as a consultant on environmental and agricultural issues throughout the West. She served President Clinton as Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the USDA from '98 to 2001. She managed the Sustainable Development Institute at the 2002 World Summit for Sustainable Development in South Africa, and in 2006, and the 2006 World Water Forum in Mexico City. In 2009, she was appointed by President Obama to serve as the California State Director of Rural Development for the USDA. She produced a widely acclaimed guidebook on access to capital and has led efforts to bring rural issues to the forefront of the state's economic summit and policymakers throughout California. Dr. Humiston earned her PhD from UC Berkeley in Environmental Science, Policy, and Management in 2009, with research focused on U.S. Farm Bill policy. She has a master's degree in International Agricultural Development from UC Davis and a bachelor's degree in Animal Science from Colorado State University. And as an A&R staff member myself, I'm particularly pleased to have done this introduction. Now please join me in welcoming Glenda Humiston.
Thank you. So I'm really excited to be here today and hope I have put together a presentation that will be both informative and hopefully amusing in a few places. I was told that pretty pictures are always welcome, and to try to weave some of what I'm doing and how I got here with the life story. So that's what we're going to try to do. I'm going to start off with just a little bit of background on A&R, because I find a lot of folks here don't have a clue who we are, what we do. So that's going to be very brief, then a little bit of background on me and kind of a chronological evolution of how I got here. And then I'm going to close out with just some thoughts about some of the exciting opportunities out there to try to deal with some of the big challenges we're facing right now and how we're trying to do business a little bit differently. So for those of you that aren't familiar, we are a statewide program. We are two of the three-legged stool that is the University of California, teaching, research, public service. We do a lot of research and a lot of public service. We've got academics on 3 campuses, and actually that's 5 now. It traditionally has been 3. Berkeley, the original campus, Davis, and Riverside. But a few years ago, we put some folks on specialists at UC Merced, and we just recently have our very first specialist at Santa Barbara. And we're in conversation now with Santa Cruz. So we are kind of scattering out. Regardless of whether we have folks on the campuses, though, we have a great many research projects that are done in conjunction with all 10 campuses. We also have, though, something very different. We have offices in all but 2 counties, and we serve those counties. It's actually tiny little Alpine over here, and then San Francisco. And we're going to actually probably have an office there at some point soon, but we do serve it. Those county offices are really crucial for us delivering program, as well as the traditional cooperative extension mission, which is to take knowledge from research and get it into the hands of people to be able to use. The one thing that's extremely different about California, though, we're the only state in the nation where our county-based academics are required to, and we support them, to have a strong research program. In most states, the research is all campus-based, and then it's handed to agents, extension agents in the counties, who basically then are trainers in essence. But here, our academics are full-bore academics, increasingly their PhD. In addition to them, we've got these 9 research extension centers, which you see as the green dot stars here. These range in size from a couple hundred to several thousand acres. They are big hunks of land, as well as buildings and tractors and greenhouses and laboratories, where people from the campuses and our county offices, but also other partners, CSU and external stakeholders, jointly do a variety of research projects. In some ways, it's a little bit like the natural reserve system UC has, except with the natural reserve system, it's look but don't touch. We touch the heck out of our land. We plow it, we burn it, we do all kinds of stuff to it. And we've got some very long-term projects out there too. Tree research that's been going on for decades. And also one of our jewels down at UC Riverside that I was just out a week or so ago that we're particularly trying to do some protection of now, the citrus varietal collection. Over 1,300 varieties of citrus in one location. There is nothing like it anywhere in the world. In fact, I recommended to the dean that they ought to be applying for World Heritage Site status for that collection, because it truly is. This is kind of a typical example of our work in general in the research arena. So 1905 is when the Citrus Research Station started down at Riverside, one of the very first west of the Mississippi River. The authorizing legislation for the Ag Experiment Station was in the 1880s. But California was one of the very first to jump on board, just as we were with land-grant universities. The authorization for the land-grant university, the Morrill Act, in 1862, signed by President Lincoln, California jumped on that quickly and actually had our land grant established here in Oakland. In fact, if you go about a block and a half in that direction, you'll see a plaque commemorating it. And then about 5 years, that was 1868. 5 years later, it moved to the current Berkeley site. And Berkeley was the first. Davis was the farm for Berkeley until the 1950s. Oops, we went off somehow. I don't know why that went off, but I'll talk really loud. Did it go back? No, it's red. Anyway, the farm for Berkeley until the 50s. Riverside, on the other hand, was a research station until the 1950s. It became a UC municipal right about the same time. So from the 50s, let's jump up to 2004. And this is just an example of one crop. There's a different story for every crop in the state, and we have over 400 in this state. But many of you are very familiar with the tangos, the cuties, these little mandarins everybody loves. They were a University of California varietal product. We have the intellectual property. It's licensed to a lot of growers here in California as well as elsewhere. And it's been extremely popular. consumption's growing, land use is growing. It's very, very, very valuable. And it's typical of some of the intellectual property that UC gets from our research. It's kind of hard to calculate it all, but I'm told that within the last 12 to 15 years, A&R's research has contributed about $40 million in patent revenue to the University of California system. So that's happening. At the same time, though, we started seeing this threat of Asian citrusillid as a vector for Huang Long Ning. And it takes a while to learn how to say that, believe me. I finally have it down correctly. This is typical problem. In fact, I was talking to an interviewer a few weeks ago, and I made the statement that it sometimes feels like we get a new bug every single week, and it's actually only about once a month. Batteries, I bet, huh? Thanks. Got to keep them batteries going. But what we're doing here is we're finding solutions to it, a variety of solutions, and one thing is a new interactive detection map that I'm going to kind of mention again when I get into citizen science, something we're real excited about. In addition to that, the research we do, we have these 9 statewide programs and 2 institutes that are scattered around the state. A couple of them, like our informatics and GIS and our Nutrition Policy Institute, are located at Berkeley, near Berkeley on the campus and one not. The Water Research Institute is actually located here in Oakland, AIC, the Ag Issue Centers at Davis, and the rest of them are kind of scattered around. These are programs that we deliver via the county offices, and these programs also collaborate and interact with our research programs. And it's really important to know this is a big chunk of the public service for the University of California, how we actually help folks out in the field. Just real quick, I mentioned those are the statewide programs. They're a little over a third of what we spend our funds on. Our campus-based research, a little less than a third. Same with our county programs and research. And then our research extension centers and admin is pretty low, thank goodness. Where we get our funding, a chunk of it's state funds, and that has been an area that's been shrinking, which is a challenge. Extramural funds has been growing, thank goodness, as has gifts and donations. We're putting a lot of work into that because as state has been shrinking, our federal funds have been flat or shrinking as well. County funds kind of holding their own, but that's a constant battle. But, you know, we're still, with the rest of the campus and the rest of UC trying to keep our funding available to keep our programs going. And then just last, a couple quick metrics. We feel like we're doing a heck of a job. Over 1,800 peer-reviewed publications from our folks. That's comparable to what the entire U.S. Department of Agriculture produces in a year. This is 1 year. 20 patents filed, and again, we feel pretty good about that. We are less than 1% of the University of California overall, but we produce 4% of the patents that are filed. In fact, if you look at the major patent revenue sources each year, the top 20, we're usually about half of those. And then, you know, we hit over 1.3 million adults and youth. We don't teach in a classroom on a campus, but we do a lot of teaching out in the field with both adults and youth, and via mostly these workshops and field days and a host of other stuff. And we've got some other great things. And one thing I'll point out too, about 20,000 volunteers whose time is worth over $40 million. These are folks that are helping deliver that 4-H, the Master Gardeners, Master Food Preservers, California Naturalists. And one big effort we've got going on now is actually to improve their experience and hopefully attract more volunteers. So that's kind of what we are. How did I get here? Well, it started off on a family farm. My family has a small cattle ranch in southwest Colorado. It's been in our family since the late 1860s. My great-great-great-grandfather came out with the cavalry during the Civil War and was stationed at Fort Lewis in Durango, not fighting in the Civil War, dealing with the Native Americans. And we all know that's an ugly story, but that's history. As you can see, this is kind of the entrance to the ranch. This is a view of the ranch, as is this. Another picture of me with my very first 4-H heifer. And growing up on a family farm is really important to me. I've always had a deep passion for farming and agriculture. In fact, growing up, it was my plan to take over this ranch. But as it turned out, when I got back from my Peace Corps service, my folks had to sit me down and say, hey kid, have you noticed we're only in our late 30s, or early 40s. We're running this ranch. And by the way, we both have jobs off the ranch because it doesn't really pay enough. for anybody to run the ranch. You need to go do something else. Go back to school, which is why I came to UC Davis. But in addition to that, we have been trying to keep the ranch going because we lost my mom several years ago. My dad's still running the ranch. He's fine because he's got a pension from that off the ranch job. But as we do estate planning for the next generation, me and my sisters, how are we going to keep it going? So we've been experimenting. This was one rather exciting experiment for 7 years. And if the Great Recession hadn't hit when it did, it might have been successful. But nevertheless, it was very interesting. We hosted a motorcycle rally over Labor Day weekend for 7 years. I went and actually worked 6 of them. And it actually was a pretty interesting thing. That's actually one of my sisters leading the parade. It turns out I've got 2 sisters that are heavy duty into motorcycles. I didn't even realize that until they told me they were hosting this. And that gets into family. Family's very important to me. This is our last family reunion there at the ranch. We hold one there every 3 years, 4th of July. Next 4th of July will be the next one. And we have a lot of folks show up. Pretty extended family, about half of them in Colorado and half of them here in California. I had a lot of family here too, and I was actually born here, although that was an accident. That's, well, my dad was stationed with the Navy at Moffett Field, so I was born there until I was about 10 or 11 months old when we went back to the ranch. I'm the only one in my family born in California other than the cousins. That's my wife with our new grandson several years ago, who has now turned into this rather handsome lad. I don't get to see him much because he's back in Michigan. My dad and my sisters, I'm the oldest of 5 girls, and of course you can't forget the 4-legged family as well. Really key growing up was service in our family. We were extremely active in 4-H, and I tell people, I wouldn't be here today. I would not be standing in front of you in this job if it was not for 4-H. I'm the very first person in my family to ever go to college. And I don't know that I would have actually been able to think about that or make it happen if I hadn't had the experience of getting out of my tiny little town to actually go to the Colorado State University campus every summer for 4-H camp. It exposes kids from rural areas to that kind. And we have the same thing going on here in California too. In fact, I was just in Sacramento for our California 4-H leadership program where we brought kids from all over the state in. That probably was a good reason I then chose to go into the Peace Corps right after I finished my bachelor's at Colorado State. Service, a chance to do something, and I had a really excellent Peace Corps. I was in Tunisia, the very northern tip of Africa, for 2 years, 1984 to 86, and it was a pivotal part of my professional and personal growth. I went into that experience thinking I was just going to be a farmer. I had my bachelor's, that was enough, I'll be a farmer, I'm really excited about that. But the project I was working on in Tunisia, out near, actually just a few miles from the Algerian border, I was helping organize a 1,000-cow dairy project in Tunisia that the U.S. was providing the cattle and the technical support, and the Saudi Arabia government was putting in $11.2 million. And the whole idea was, you remember the mid-'80s, the whole Cold War, proxy war stuff? This was Saudi Arabia and the U.S. showing what great partners there were and working in a third world country. But Tunisia actually needed something like this because they had just lost their market completely when Spain and Portugal entered the common market in Europe because their only product was olive oil. They used to be a colony of France. They were selling a lot of olive oil. France has a lot of dairy. Tunisians love dairy. Everybody's happy for 30 years. They lose their market overnight. So they decide overnight to build a dairy industry, which sort of needed to be done, but frankly, was really badly designed and badly organized. And it's a part of what got me real interested in how things like this were decided. What's behind the policy and the programs and the planning and the decisions? It was something I hadn't really thought about, particularly not on a larger regional, let alone a geopolitical scale. So that coupled with, frankly, I've always been a little bit of a restless sort and love the adventure. This is my hike to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, something I'm so glad I did and don't ever have to do again. If you're really motivated, do it, but do it like I did. Hike down one day, turn around and hike out the next, because if I'd have stayed down there an extra day, I don't know if I could have hiked out of there. Because by the time I got out, I couldn't move for 4 days. It's amazing. Harvesting abalone up on the North Coast. I was on a professional tug of war team. It was great fun. We actually won a national championship back in the early 80s. In fact, that's where this is from too, Hard Rockers Holiday in Silverton, Colorado. As far as I know, my world record still holds. I actually need to go confirm that. That thing you see there is a 55-gallon drum, you know, those big metal drums. If you're really insane and in relatively good shape and you're used to 10,000-foot elevation, you can fill that thing up in 37.7 seconds. And if you could see the picture right afterwards, I'm lying on the ground going, trying to get some air. I look like a fish out of water because there really isn't much oxygen at 10,000-foot elevation. But it worked. I played rugby for several years. In fact, I made the first USA women's national team. Got a concussion and retired because I wanted to keep my brain together. And just a lot of hiking in that. And you know, this is important because it's a part of me. I love the adventure part, the family, the farm, etc., but also work. And my work's taken some really weird angles. In fact, when I speak to young people a lot, one of the key messages I give them is to have a big goal out there, but to be pretty flexible about which path you take to get there, because you never know where the opportunity is going to show up. I would have never in a million years thought I was going to be in this kind of job 30 years ago. It just wasn't even a glimmer to me. I paid my way through my bachelor's degree operating heavy road construction equipment in 3 different states, which was actually great fun and a lot of good money. You could just about make enough money in the summer to almost pay for school. Of course, school cost a lot less then too. I built houses a couple years. Then I started getting into work after my master's. When I came back from Peace Corps and got my master's at Davis, I had that executive director of a Sonoma County Farmlands Group, which was a job to really try to build bridges between urban and rural and agriculture and environmentalists. And I really loved that. It involved doing a whole lot of big public meetings. We produced a lot of great documents. We testified. We did all kinds of stuff. And that kind of led to my appointment from President Clinton. I managed in the early 90s to pull off 2 things that all the experts swore were absolutely impossible. I actually love taking on impossible tasks. They're very exciting. One of them was I developed a statewide plan on water quality management for grazing and rangelands in the early 90s. And this was for the whole state because the State Water Board at that time decided that the entire state was going to be declared coastal zone. Imagine the fun of standing up over in Bishop and Susanville on the other side of the Sierra explaining to the cowboys how they're in the coastal zone now. But actually, you know, I managed to convince them it was for their best. It was for their good, and they agreed. And we got a plan together that was still the only one in the state that was unconditionally approved by EPA, State Water Board, State Board of Forestry, etc. I also managed to win a statewide election to serve as the president of the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts, which at that time in the mid-90s was small, local, independent special districts, the boards of which typically were straight white males in their 60s and 70s who were predominantly Republicans. At that point in time, I had at least 4 strikes against me. I was pretty young by their standard. I was female. Kind of hard to change that. I was a Democrat, and I was an out lesbian. But I managed to win that election with over 70% of the vote. It was those 2 things that brought me to the attention of some folks in D.C. who threw my name into the hat to get the appointment from President Clinton to serve as Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment for the last 3 years of his term. But even with my name in the hat, I never would have got that without a letter, a piece of paper that I want to share a little quick story, because people ask me, how do you get an appointment like that? Well, some of it's just getting your name in the right place and people thinking maybe you're the right sort of person. I didn't actually apply for it. Oftentimes those political appointments you see, it's not people who applied for them. It's who knows who and who's this and that. And again, I never thought I'd be getting a position like this either. When they threw my name in the hat, I was told, go get letters of support. So I did. And I think the guy that told me to do this, I learned later the only reason he threw my name in the hat is because he knew it would drive the good old boys absolutely insane. Because they couldn't stand that loudmouth woman from California. And he didn't think I had a snowball's chance and you know where of ever getting this. He had no idea that I had spent years doing favors for people and getting things done and accomplishing, like those two things. And actually doing a lot of folks for a lot of elected officials. I was able to get a lot of support, enough so that I got down to the final two. And long story, because it was months of campaigning and work. Final two, February, I finally get a phone call saying, you know, sorry, you're not going to get the job, kid. And since the guy was 78 years old, he could call me a kid. And I said, well, you know, I'm going to be in D.C. next week. I'd like to visit with you. And it was like, no. Anyway, I get to D.C. next week because I was there for meetings anyway with California Ag Leadership Program. And I just thought, you know, what do I have to lose? They told me I don't have a job, right? So I go and knock on the guy's door. He's the White House liaison at USDA. And I knock on the door and I say, listen, I think you should give me 10 minutes to chat with me. He says, now, young lady, I know you've been told you're not getting that job. I said, yes, I have. And guess what? I think you made a mistake and you should talk to me for 10 minutes. He says, well, come on in. So we talk for about an hour. He calls in his chief of staff and says, call the White House. We maybe want to rethink this. So they call over to the Office of Personnel Management, and they get the deputy director, Marie-Therese Dominguez. You always remember certain names in your life, and I'm not good with names either. She gets on the phone, and I can hear her. She's kind of hollering. Oh, you've already done that. I don't have time to reopen these things. You told me, blah, blah, blah. And Carl Quillick, the 78-year-old guy, who got his job because he diapered Bill Clinton, literally. He kept saying my name, Linda Humiston. And finally she says, wait a minute, what was that name again? And he said it again, and she goes, okay, tell her to be in my office at 3 o'clock tomorrow. So I get to her office for 15 minutes, that's all they schedule. And I get in there, and she says, you know, I want to let you know you're not getting this job, but I wanted to meet you, and it's not because of this stack of these, you know, I had letters from Congress people, dozens of them, not just California, other states, because I organized a Western States campaign trying to make the case there aren't enough Westerners in D.C., and it worked. The governor of Colorado was the one that kept me alive for quite a while, because he and my dad had worked together. But anyway, she says, these are all great, and I had organizations, national organizations, it was lovely. This is the letter that I wanted to see who got this. And it was a piece of notebook paper that had been ripped out of a spiral notebook, written in hand, in pencil. And it was basically telling her what a wonderful person I was, how much I had helped them. And it was from this group of Hispanic cleaning ladies, cleaners, they were house cleaners. And they had asked if they could come make a presentation years earlier. I mean, we're talking like 10 years maybe, at our local chapter of the Business and Professional Women, which I joined because I wanted to try to learn how to dress more professionally and wear a dress. Not one of the things I excelled at, but nevertheless, I had completely forgotten. It never even occurred to me. But I had asked the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for a letter, and the secretary there, who was writing up the letter for the president to sign, told one of them. They said, "Well, can we write a letter?" And she said, "Sure. Here's the address." That was the letter that got me into OPM. My 15 minutes with Marie-Therese Dominguez turned into 45, because it turns out my family's cattle ranch isn't very far from her family's cattle ranch in northern New Mexico, and our childhoods growing up, we were like sisters separated at birth, and we really hit it off. And she called back to USDA and said, "Okay, get her in to see the secretary and let's do it." That was March. I still didn't get a phone call till June when they said, "Okay, you got the job, get here in 2 weeks." So I had a great time doing this job. It was 3 years overseeing Natural Resources Conservation Service and Forest Service. But then I came back from that and was really interested after President Bush got inaugurated. One of my claims to fame, I was the last political appointee to leave USDA on January 20th, 2001, about 10 minutes before Bush got inaugurated. And I did that for a variety of reasons. That is another full story, but anyway. I had some real interest coming out of there about policy, even more so than going in. I went in with a lot of interest in things like natural resources, these kind of questions. We were already asking these questions and trying to figure out what we were going to do. And we were trying to figure out what the heck is sustainable agriculture. That was a term that was just really kind of coming into its own throughout the 90s, but you could ask 10 people and get 10 different definitions. And that was part of the problem. I mean, we all want it, but what is it? How do we get it? So Berkeley attempts. This I did in 2002 because I didn't think it was just the economy and the ecology and equity, which the 3 E's were typical then. Energy has got to be something we take into account, both giving and going. And frankly, when you're talking private land, you've got to really think about landowner objectives and what's in it for them, as well as feasible implementation. That's one of the things in policy and planning that has driven me nuts for decades and still do to this day. People with great ideas that aren't feasible in the slightest. And unfortunately, for too many people, they don't even care. They're still going to push policy to try to make it happen, whether it makes sense or not. It was a little rough, but actually I'm pretty happy with that for that part of my life. It got me into the research. So now we're getting towards UC Berkeley. I picked up my consulting when I got back, but I was getting kind of bored with it. And at the same time, several professors at Berkeley kept having me come to campus and give a lecture. And then they take me to lunch and say, you really should do your PhD. And I said, are you nuts? I am not doing a PhD. No way, no how, I am not doing a PhD. But they kept bugging me, and then they offered a fellowship to pay for most of it. And I have to admit, I had these questions about how do you get to sustainable ag? And I knew that a big chunk of it was the Farm Bill. This is the big, giant omnibus bill every 5 years or so that Congress does that funds everything at USDA and sets policy. And you know, it used to be just really around environment and economy, but now we're getting into cheap food, green revolution, environmental, international trade, all these other issues are coming up. And I wanted to try to figure out how did they get decided and how could you affect them? I had some notions about what better policy would be, but I also know me well enough to know that unless somebody's forcing me, I'm probably not going to do the research and writing. And I figured a PhD, they make me research and write. I mean, that's what they're good for, right? So I said yes, and I started school. And for those of you that aren't familiar with ag politics, they're very, very, very different than most politics. Until very recently, they were virtually nonpartisan. Every single issue was usually something regional or a commodity, and you would have both Republicans and Democrats on both sides of all those issues. So it made for some excellent political theater and pretty interesting stuff to work with. So as I started my PhD, I initially was going to actually push for a particular policy that I thought was right, but then I quickly figured out that I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of making that happen. Nobody did, quite frankly. And then I got to wondering, why not? What is stopping U.S. Congress from creating good Farm Bill policy? So I actually started researching that. And this is my PhD in 3 slides. For those of you that don't think you can do it. This is my PhD dissertation in 3 slides. So you've got a long time of these different groups, mostly environmental conservation, fighting for change, getting aced out. They're just not really allowed in the process. Their voices aren't heard. Pushing. Then you get these new players that start popping up in the 2000s. Public interest, taxpayer groups, the private sector, healthcare, the physicians about nutrition and that kind of stuff started popping up then. And they start pressing these new demands, particularly on the White House and on the House and Senate. But they didn't really pay attention to the traditional iron triangle, which is your commodity groups, your vested interests, your department, in this case USDA, and then your House and Senate committees that see those. That's a very traditional iron triangle. That term was coined for the military-industrial complex. But there's a lot of those kind of complexes out there. Healthcare has one, education has one, this is the agricultural one. So if you take this, so here's this, and now we're gonna fade it, and there it is. I started asking questions about, okay, so how, looking at the 2008 Farm Bill, how effective was that new effort? How come this didn't work better, these two groups trying to work out? Why is there this gaping hole? Some of those folks there really ought to be partnering here, but they're not. And were the new players heard? How effective was the media? And what is the basis for that traditional circle of power? So now you know my PhD research. The conclusion was, the new players really screwed up because they thought they could ignore that traditional iron triangle. And that iron triangle is powerful because vested interests have billions of dollars to lose. They've got a vested interest. That's why they're called that. They're very well established. They're long-term relationships. They don't break up easy. Whereas the new people, they thought, oh, we'll just work on the White House and we'll work with the House and Senate and we can ignore the USDA and the interest groups. That was their strategy. it failed miserably. I mean, well, there was a couple little wins here and there. So then I concluded the dissertation with some recommendations on what they should do to kind of avoid that and do it better. I turned that thing in May of 2009, just in time to take the appointment from President Obama. And I spent the last 6 years, almost 7 years, working at USDA Rural Development as a state director here in California. And it was a fantastic job. I loved that job. It was hard to leave that job to come to this. I had 3 days off after I left that and started this. But I loved it. And two of the things I created there was this book on jobs, economic development, sustainable community. What's really interesting, this job does not require you to do any writing, but I must have still had some hungover stuff from doing a PhD. I produced these 2 books there, which is unheard of. State directors don't do that kind of thing. This access to capital one, actually we're updating. That was 5 years ago. We've got a meeting coming up in October this year where we're pulling the players in and we're going to update it, because really one of the huge problems out in rural areas and in agriculture and natural resources is the economy. It's just a mess. And some of that's around access to capital as well as policy. So I left that to come here, and I tell you, I'm thrilled. I hit my 2-year mark a week or so ago, and it's been exciting. I mean, Janet Napolitano was just a thrill to work with. All commodity groups, our 4-H kids. You know, I've been to Panama and Brazil and China already in this job. I'm at meetings around the nation, meeting with fellow deans and presidents of universities. We're trying to find answers and solutions. It's really exciting. And A&R in particular is exciting. For those of you that are interested, I urge you to go to our website and check it out. And particularly up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a button for our strategic plan, which is where I'm going to go now. My last couple slides are kind of like, where are we going? We got some big challenges out there. And you know, this is big challenges for all of us, but as you can see, it really gets into A&R, into our mission, into our research, into our program delivery, and what we're trying to do in the field. And particularly if you start zeroing down into things like drought. You know, this is 2007, 2011, 13, 15. There is always a drought somewhere. And increasingly in the western states, it's a lot of drought. Not this year, obviously, but it could easily be again next year. And when you start combining things like climate, land use, socioeconomic, and crop vulnerability, you get this vulnerability index. And as you can see, California's got some real challenges right now and ahead of us for decades to come. And it's not just climate change, it's a variety of things. For one, right now, lack of access to farm workers. It is killing big chunks of our ag sector. We've got 2 counties here that just had several millions of dollars of crops rot because there was nobody to harvest them. And that's an ongoing issue. It's a challenge for our farmers because over the decades, the share of the food dollar, that dollar you spend in a grocery store that actually goes to a farmer, has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Right now, it's about 17 cents on average. In fact, actually, this is a few years old. I bet it's even less. But it goes to a lot of other stuff. The farm to fork chain. That's why you hear so many people talking farm to fork, which is a big part of President Napolitano's Global Food Initiative. How do we improve growing the food, having access to it, getting it to the consumers, everything along that line. And also poverty. This is something that rips my heart out, and it should yours too. Look at the poverty in this state, and look where it's at. It's in some of the areas where we're the salad bowl and nuts, and we grow stuff for the world here. And yet the people that live there are in poverty. That purple, that's over half the people there are in poverty and have been for decades in many cases. And this is a hunger, food insecurity rates. Look up at the far north and down south in Imperial. In fact, this is people in the midst of the San Joaquin Valley being homeless. Homeless rates there are huge and increasing. People think it's only an urban problem. It's a rural problem too. So what do we try to do with that? I mentioned farm to fork as one thing. We're doing a whole lot. We do research at every bit of this. So one of the things you try to do is you try to understand all the activities in the supply chain, the value chain. So the stuff that goes into growing a crop, then the production, making sure we're taking care of land and water and labor, then the processing, the distribution, getting it out to the consumer. What can we do to make improvements there? Including improvements on things like UC Davis at the Mondavi Centers learning now how to reuse water in processing food 10 times. They actually have a goal of net zero use of water in food processing. That's going to be huge as we get closer to things like that. bring together a lot of other industry sectors. So here's agriculture, here's their value chain. As you go through it, you intersect the goods movement and agro-tourism, the retail food, technology, renewable energy, manufacturing, and a dozen others. How can we build synergies and leverage each other's resources and find collaboration to improve the whole system, both the value chain as well as the industry clusters? One thing that we've got going on here in California that we're very excited to be a partner of, as is UC Davis, UC Merced, the Global Food Initiative, and us, is Central Valley Ag Plus. This is one of the handful of regional manufacturing hubs designated by the White House for some special help and attention from the federal government a couple of years ago. It's one of only 2 in the nation that's around food. 28 counties, food and beverage manufacturing, and the reason I love this is that they're really trying to take a holistic view. How do you make sure there's adequate workforce? The infrastructure's there, the research and innovation is there, the access to capital, the supply chain, all of the things, trying to make sure they're all there and they're all functioning. And increasingly, it's not just, I should probably go and add a few more because I think Santa Barbara is getting more active with this, as is UCLA is getting a little bit active with this as an anchor site to be shipping that food and going through the port of LA and Long Beach as far as the goods movement. I'm also very active in things like the State Economic Summit, which was mentioned. And part of that, I co-chair the Working Landscapes Action Team, which is one of 7 action teams at the summit. And this was created because the very first year I went to the summit, this was in my previous job about 5 years ago, San Jose, we had over 500 of the best and brightest people from around the state interested in economic development, including a whole lot of local and state government folks, interest groups of all sorts. At the end of that day, you could have sworn the California economy was existing on a barren asteroid in outer space. There was no discussion, recognition, or even thinking of soil and water and agriculture and food and natural resources. There was nothing. The talk was all about Silicon Valley and technology and transportation and entertainment. And in fact, if you looked at the circle of the state's economy, that's what they had as their thing, wholesale, retail, nothing. So we went out the next year, myself and a bunch of other folks, and we fought hard to get this chartered. People weren't excited about it at first, but now they are. We've been around for 4 years. We defined it as that group of activities, of which agriculture ends up being about half the value overall, a little less than half. We then went to the community college and said, hey, tell us what the actual value of this is. And they came up, this is 2012 data, $318 billion in direct sales and exports. That's important because one of the things I hear all too often nowadays is, unfortunately, from too many UC professors, and I call them out every time I hear it too, agriculture is less than 2% of the state's GDP. Why do we even care about it? That is an incredibly stupid statement. And I know you're not supposed to say the word stupid in academia, but sometimes you have to. It's incredibly stupid. All it's looking at is the raw value of the raw farm gate. When that crop is raw in the field, that's all it is. It's ignoring all of that value chain and all the industry cluster activity, which ends up being roughly this. And that number doesn't really include recreation. It'd be a lot bigger if it did. Look at those potential new jobs within 5 years. We're redoing the study right now. We're bringing in not only those, but some of the more traditional economists and a few others, because if we really did this study right, my gut tells me we're going to find that Working Landscapes is well over a third and perhaps approaching half the state's economy. And we've got to start getting policymakers to start looking at it that way. Policy, programs, fiscal allocations, et cetera. We're doing business a little differently. This is an exciting memorandum of understanding we signed in May. Some of my folks working on conservation ag systems innovation came to me and said, we want to be one of those statewide programs for A&R. I said, no, I think you guys are working on much bigger, a lot more partners. Let's try to do this a little differently. And I got to give them credit. They went out and they dug up all the rest of these folks, big players. That's us, the leadership of that, signing this MOU. We're now leveraging each other's resources and collaborating and getting some economies of scale, and it's really exciting what we're doing there. We're going to be doing more of this in A&R. And not just A&R, we're starting to do it with campuses now too, and not just UC, CSU, and the community colleges. More and more collaborations and partnerships. I mentioned citizen science earlier. This is something I'm extremely excited about because one of my big fears for all of us right now is the unbelievably high level of scientific illiteracy in our general population. And when people don't believe in science or use science, you get really bad policy. And that policy affects all of us. But the only way to get around that is to start getting average citizens to actually have a role in science. And I don't mean make work, I mean real stuff. We've got several things going on with this that are pretty fun and exciting, but I'm running out of time because I do want to leave time for questions. We've just kicked off creation of a statewide innovation entrepreneurship network. And what we're doing there is we're catalyzing that. Because I'm a firm believer you don't reinvent the wheel and you don't duplicate what's already out there. We're going out into regions, pulling together the existing players, having a look, an inventory of the resources, jointly identifying where there's gaps, and then jointly working to fill those gaps so that we make sure that if you got an idea, and I don't care if you're a 4-H kid, or you're a UC researcher, or you're some farmer that's hiding the better mousetrap in his barn, and they do that occasionally, that you can then take that through the system and get the support you need. Do you need to talk to an IP attorney? Do you need to talk to a finance person? Do you need to go into a CRADA, a Cooperative Research Development Agreement with UC or somebody else? What do you need? What can we do to help you to take that idea to whatever, to a new business, a new product, a patented item, whatever. And that's a real key thing. To do that, we just kicked off the Vine. In fact, President Napolitano helped us announce that down at Forbes AgTech in June. And we just had our 5th and most successful ever Apps for Ag. We're starting to hook up the ag and natural resource community with coders and hackers, and they're coming up with some amazing apps for the phone. It's really exciting. I got a couple challenges we're dealing with. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those because I prefer spending time on the good stuff. I'm a raging optimist, as you might tell. But we got some challenges. We've been losing our academic footprint, and a lot of this is due to significant cuts in state support. And that's one of the things we're working on now, because President Napolitano and I have both said many times in public, we are going to rebuild that footprint. And I take great pride in this last year because it did go up for the first time in a long time. And our goal is to keep it going up, even if it's only a few bodies per year, more hire than retire. And we got a lot of retirements going on. So our HR people are a little overwhelmed right now. But it's crucial because, you know, we've got roughly half the academics that we had 30 years ago, and the needs are bigger than ever. When we start thinking about things like drought and climate change and invasive species and pests and everything else we're dealing with. This is actually a national problem. And that's something that APLU, our national organizations, and folks from all the universities, land grants, are working on. Because if you look at this is the investment in agricultural research, public research from China. Isn't that nice? There's the US. And if this isn't a one-to-one correlation, I certainly messed up my statistics class, because look what's happening to China's productivity in ag. And yeah, ours isn't exactly going down, but it ain't doing so good, especially from what it used to be. This is a huge problem, and fortunately, Congress is paying attention to this. I was back there a little over a month ago. I was asked to come testify to the House Ag Committee on Ag Research, and I'm thrilled to say there is some bipartisanship, at least at that committee, given all the insanity in DC these days. But we've got some big reports showing, you know, for every $20, for every $1 of federal funds, the public gets a $20 value. I mean, I wish my stock portfolio performed nearly that well. We also have this Council for Ag Research Extension Teaching, CARET, where we take folks from our external stakeholders, farmers and others, to DC, and they lobby on behalf of university research. It's a great program. Last but not least, this is my last slide. What it really comes down to, all those things, the challenges, the testifying, the new things, citizen science, all of it, it's really about collaboration. It's about finding synergy and getting economies of scale and leveraging and partnering. That's really something I've spent 30+ years doing, and I've always managed to pull off amazing stuff because of it. And it's something I'm trying to get A&R and UC to do more of. In fact, that's one of the reasons I took this job. In my previous job, I was constantly, for 6 years, trying to get Cooperative Extension and the University of California to the table on these big issues. And they're happy to come there to do a research project, but when it comes to actually doing like economic development and develop, I could not get them to the table. I'm the boss now. So, you know, there's only a few minutes left. I'd love to answer a couple questions. I don't know if that's what you all were looking for, but they said kind of use your life story to kind of say why you're trying to do what you're doing. Questions?
I have a question. Something I don't quite understand. So early in your talk, you're talking about how UC has three branches: teaching, research, and community service, and then A&R does too.
Well, the land grant university system for all land grants, not just California, all but nationally, is typically our mission is 3 items: teaching, mostly the focus on undergraduate, but also graduate. Research, so UC is the research entity here in California in the master plan versus CSU and the community colleges. And then public service, and that's where a lot of our statewide programs come in, as well as Cooperative Extension, is really making sure that the product of the UC, not just kids graduating with a degree, but the research and everything else, including things like UC serving as an anchor institution for trying to find new ways to do carbon neutrality. That's a huge public service, because we're big enough, we can do stuff smaller entities can't, and really see if it's going to work, and then have others replicate it. So that's the 3-legged stool of the land grant university.
And I think you said that A&R is involved in 2. That's research.
Well, we don't really do undergraduate teaching on a campus, so typically we're not considered part of teaching. It's only since I've got here that I'm arguing we do teaching with that 1.3 million kids and adults we reach every year with our programs. But until I started hollering about that, typically, and believe me, the academic senate definitely says we don't do teaching. It's a little argument we have.
Before colleges on the campuses that A&R has not considered.
Well, we don't teach there. We pay the salary, benefits, and about $40,000 in support each for the specialists who are doing research and extension. Now, some of them might have a split appointment where a small percentage is teaching, although very few. That's something typically we haven't really done much of. Because really, if you're doing research and extension, that's a full-time job, more than a full-time job in many cases. So that's it. But, I have said I'm not opposed to exploring split appointments. My predecessor hated them, refused. I'm not opposed to exploring that, but if I got 70% of a person, I want my 70%. And that's been a problem in the past. If somebody gets into teaching, it takes over their life, and then we're not getting the research or the extension. So it's one of those things we have to work on. In the back there. Did I see a question?
I had a question about the chart you showed 17% of the dollar going to farmers. And
Oh, yeah.
Initiatives that you make around that. What about pricing power? I mean, in the sense that I feel that there is a possibility that you're going to improve revenues, et cetera, but the margins won't go up because they don't have much pricing power. So do you have any research on that or initiatives to improve?
Yeah, that's actually why we're trying to do these regional farm to fork initiatives like that Ag Plus. Because if we can start creating more activity at the local and regional level in between the farm and the consumer, that's economic activity that's staying in that region. And then it provides the farmer with more options of where to sell their crop. And frankly, for people like me, my family's ranch didn't have room for a kid when I came back. And increasingly, we see that in agriculture now. We're all living longer. If you see farming staying in a family, it's often jumping a generation. It's going from grandparents to a grandkid. Just because if you got a farm that's able to support one family, it can't always have a kid come in and be a partner. So in that case, those kids need something they can hopefully do in the ag sector, because otherwise, if they go to Silicon Valley or they go to medical school or something like that, they don't always want to come back to the farm. And it's a big challenge. I'm not joking. One of our biggest challenges right now is farmers. Our farmers are an aging population. A lot of them have not done particularly good estate planning. And keeping, and you know, right now, most farms out there are family farms. 97–8% of them are family farms. And I'm actually a believer that that's a very healthy thing and we should keep that. But how do we facilitate that? Because there's a whole lot of potential changing of ownership this next decade or so that could be kind of scary. That's one reason we're really pushing a lot of young people as well as others. Doesn't have to be young. One big initiative we've got going on right now is working with returning veterans. We're trying to encourage them to think about agriculture as a way to continue their service to their country and hopefully make a living too. I'm not saying donate, but to think of it about as a viable career track, because it really is. There's a lot of jobs in the entire ag ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, I had 2 questions for you, and they're both really challenging, so feel free to pass. So one is a political question, and it's what you see are the main challenges of forthcoming with the Farm Bill. And the second one is personal. I've done so many things in a big way on a variety of topics, interconnected, but really diversified. And so what do you see for yourself as goals in 10 years? Where would you like to be in 10 years?
Okay, those are challenging, aren't they? I can't believe I'm going to say this Farm Bill's the easier of the two, and nobody would say that usually. The Farm Bill is still a big giant question mark right now. It does look like there is strong support to keep the nutrition and the other programs together, which means we will have a Farm Bill. If you split those two, you don't have a Farm Bill, because the people that support the ag programs reluctantly vote for the food programs, the nutrition programs. And then you've got all these urban folks who could care less about the farm programs, but they want those nutrition programs, so they reluctantly vote for the farm programs. And that's been an unholy alliance since the 1960s. But it's the only reason we have a Farm Bill. So we're going to have one. What's going to be in it? I don't know. The president's budget was a nightmare. Thank God for us that for research, university research, there is strong bipartisan support. So the numbers we just got out of the House, which is always the more conservative of the two, were flat. We didn't take a cut this year. We didn't get a cost of living increase, but we stayed flat. That's a miracle. I'm so thrilled. A lot of us are thrilled. Rural development, farm programs, risk management, some of the others, anything linked to climate change, they're all looking at cuts. And there's a lot of folks that want to cut the nutrition programs too. There's also a lot of interest in revamping them. Right now, field hearings are going on. A lot of information's coming in. Interest groups are already geared up. The real action is going to start in January, February, because next year is when all of it starts coming together and all the fighting happens. And right now, I frankly wouldn't take bets on most of it. I'm hoping our research piece keeps going. But, I care about the other titles too, because like the conservation title, we work we work very closely with NRCS and Forest Service on a host of projects, and they actually fund a lot of research. So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but it's going to be great political theater, as it always is, and it always has been. And nobody ever really knows what's going to happen until the very end. All kinds of funny things happened the last week or two. Myself, I don't know. I really don't. I don't have a good answer for 10 years. I came into this job thinking that it probably is my apex job, if that's the right term. I definitely want to do this for at least 6 to 7 years because I'm passionate, personally as well as professionally, about the mission and about our programs. I have been since I was a kid. I'm 4-H cooperative extension. I grew up with those. I'm very passionate about them. And I love what ANR is, but also what it could be. And as you well know, as part of ANR, we're doing a lot of upheaval and restructuring and trying to drag certain parts of us into the 21st century that aren't quite there yet, and do a little bit more getting programs to work together, break down silos. I'm really excited about that. I love fixing things. And then there's parts of ANR that were broken, and I love fixing them. Once they get fixed, I'm going to be bored and need to do something else. I've never held a job longer than about 5 or 6 or 7 years because I'm pretty good at fixing things. And like my last job, it was a disaster when I took it over. And that last year, I was kind of twiddling my thumbs a little bit because I had new senior leadership. Things were humming. The team was great. Programs were going out the door. We were the top of the nation in most of the programs. It was great, but it was kind of boring too. Yeah, so I don't know. 6 or 7 years here. I do think one thing I'm going to probably do in 2 or 3 years is very carefully look at a couple corporate boards to get on, and in particular corporate boards that have the ability to really make a difference. Because whether we like to admit it or not, in some ways, corporations, big multinational corporations, are more powerful than governments in much of the world. Even here in the U.S., I still would argue, and sometimes I certainly would say that too. I'm really interested as part of my access to capital work with this idea of shared value and corporate social responsibility. And I kind of feel like if I was going to try to fix something else, that might be an interesting avenue to work on. But who knows? You know, again, who knows what opportunity will show up? I try to remain open to opportunities. I hope that's a good answer.
Excellent.
Yeah. Was there one more question? We're past time if people need to go. I'm okay.
Really quickly, you mentioned about really interesting tasks. What about bioengineering?
Bioengineering? Oh, that's a really exciting field.
Yeah.
Totally.
Can you share something?
Yeah, you know, a couple of the apps that came out were things like on the phone, using the reader on your phone that reads barcodes. That kind of technology to be able to read the yellow cards sticky cards we put up in the edge of fields and orchards to catch insects, to be able to quickly read those and get them into the database here so that we can more quickly track vectors of how insects are moving, because insects carry disease. And if we can stop them quickly, then we don't have to use as many chemicals or other means of controlling them. So that was one that was really kind of exciting. There were several others. One of the things we're trying to do, bioengineering, material science. Actually, I've been reaching out, talking to the engineering schools at a couple locations, particularly over at Merced, and we're actually doing a lot with QB3 over here in UC San Francisco about partnering and opportunities. You know, a new company that just formed this last year or so that I love to tell the story of is a postdoc from UC Santa Barbara that was working on thin cell solar sheets, like they're like super thin, flexible. And he was driving back and forth between UC Santa Barbara and Lawrence Berkeley Lab by all that beautiful agriculture. And he was listening to some story on NPR, and he had this epiphany about, you know, it's not growing the crops that's the challenge. It's actually protecting them after they're harvested to have longer shelf life to get to the consumer. And he found a way to create this coating for a crop made from leftover, you know, waste green products like the leaves and stems in the field. Thin coating, it's odorless, tasteless, you can't see it, it's healthy, it's edible. And in fact, in this fall, soon, you're going to start seeing avocados in the market with this coating on it. So he's created a new company from that. He was a solar cell engineer guy, and he came up with this thing that's going to revolutionize the food sector. So I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, getting different people together and seeing what kind of sparks fly and what kind of ideas we can find. And we're starting to do more of that too. That's what that whole innovation initiative is about. Sure.
I just wanted to ask one question. There's probably many ways, but if you could name one way in particular that you think would be good for people as a way of investing in agriculture, it's just an idea that you think, oh, this might be an option for you to be more involved if you wanted to be.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, obviously, an easy one is go to your farmer's market. That's an easy one if you've got one nearby. But I would say think about getting engaged in some of our volunteer activities if you'd like to. Be a 4-H leader. Start working with these young people to start looking at life differently. You've all got a skill you could be sharing with them. Be a master gardener and start getting more knowledgeable and helping schools do school gardens and edible landscapes. Work with our master naturalists and start helping the environmental community and the ag community communicate with each other. I mean, we've got a lot of volunteer programs for anybody that wants to get active. And depending on your preferences and your passions, I bet one of them would work for you. Anything else? Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. The back came off of this halfway through, and I was afraid to mess with it because it would break.